There's definitely a certain mindset that one gets into, you know, like a zone, if you're just drawing for quite a while, and that's nice. That's really meditative, which is healthy, I think, for an artist. So these are all 22 by 30, so that format's the same. I don't know, it's kind of an exercise in letting go of decisions. You know, I decided up front, okay, they're all going to be the same size, they're all going to be the same medium. It's just a matter of finding the right image, you know. A lot of these are found online, some from books. The latest series is on Fort Davis bunkers down in Galveston, so I was able to document those myself. And yeah, that's going forward, that's another direction I'd like to go, is to travel to places and document them and then make drawings out of those. But I think the sculptures we'll look at later, I think that they still maintain a certain level of abstraction that is really interesting to me. As you and I were discussing earlier, if you look at the drawings up close, you can tell that there's a certain level of abstraction that's upheld on a micro level. When you back up a few feet, your eye doesn't register it as abstract. And I really like that in-between space of navigating, you know, what's abstract, what's realistic, and it just makes it really interesting to be the artist behind it.
It gets very personal when you're drawing.
Yeah, it's weird. It does. It does get very personal, but it's almost so personal that's only a level that you know it or something, because there's a homogeneous quality to the drawings, or these drawings that I'm working on, that I think is deceptive, because it's hard for a person that's not an artist or making the drawing themselves to understand that space that we're talking about. But obviously something works for us because we keep on, you know, staring at this piece of paper for months on end. So something's keeping you coming back to it, and I think it has to be a part of the process like that.
I've always found the drawing process very meditative.
Yeah, I do too. And I think there's a large part of my life where that kind of probably scared me a little bit. You know, I was tapped into a mindset of, well, the art needs to be expressionistic and it needs to be spontaneous and improvised and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, art's a lot bigger than anything like that.
Yeah. I like also the compositions with the use of the negative area. How do you decide on that before you?
Well, I mean, ideally, if I'm taking the picture myself, you do all the cropping when you take the photograph. If you're using secondary material, online, books, whatever, sometimes you don't need to crop anything. Other times you crop and add a little something here, add a little something there. Some of these drawings have little bits of floor that are added just because it needed some sort of like balance in the composition. But again, if there is cropping, if there is editing in that regard, it's done as early as possible, so that once I get into the drawing itself, I don't have to think about those things. Because I work from a photograph and I'll grid that out, and then I'll scale the grid up and I'll transfer it that way. And just those early marks. Actually, the grid itself, making a really faint trace grid, I think that psychologically allows me a portal into the drawing, because otherwise it's just this expansive potential, you know, which sounds great, but you don't really want to deal with that.
Yeah. No, I hear you. All paper has that potential, yeah. And then what happens at the end is...
Yeah, and certainly that is a strategy that's employed by a lot of people successfully, but yeah, there's a certain coddling that you have to employ for a drawing. You know, you can't just put your coffee cup down on it and expect it to have an impact. Well, I mean, it sounds asinine, but when you're making a painting, and it is a certain type of expressionistic painting, I mean, how many cigarette butts are in a Jackson Pollock painting? You know, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
It's not the same space. So, right, I mean, then it becomes a meditation on basically tones. You know, you're in a situation, okay, is this tone right next to this tone? So, and that becomes the one sort of ethos through the whole thing. And then it becomes very doable.
Yeah.
There's nothing really that much to figure out. You just, as somebody that makes art, you know, you just feel that's balanced. That's resolved.
Do you feel a point where the photo doesn't matter anymore?
Oh yeah. I have to stop looking at the reference. Maybe 7/10 out of the way done, because otherwise it's just, I don't know. You're doing something. You're denying the drawing what it needs to become. You're kind of shackling the drawing in a way. Yeah. Also, I mean, it's interesting that the pandemic coincided with this series of bunker drawings because it feels somehow appropriate, you know, that we're all kind of bunkered away with this invisible adversary. And the nature of truth concerning what is real and what isn't real and all that stuff is so much in the foreground of our lives today. So I think there's something psychologically, I mean, if you look at a bunker, it's like, okay, this is either the most terrifying thing I've ever seen, because the reason it's built is because you've got this war economy and bombs are going to start dropping on your head any second. But at the same time, if bombs are dropping on your head at any second, it's the most beautiful place to be because you're going to survive it, you know. So that sort of equivocation of comfort and threat, I think is relevant today, you know. Or maybe it's always relevant, but it certainly feels really relevant today. Some of them just have a more ominous feel. Some of them feel almost comical. Like this guy's kind of both. This is a iron cupola on a larger bunker. So that's not concrete, that's actually iron. But I don't know, it looks kind of silly. I mean, at one point it almost looks like it's referencing a Philip Guston. There's a reference to kind of futurism as well, because I think a lot of these things look like they're out of a sci-fi movie. Mm-hmm. Like almost ruins from a science fiction movie or something. And I'm really turned on by that. I like to think about architecture and how it's the psychological, the sort of unaware psychological state that goes into why a building looks like a building, you know. And this has to do a lot with modernism and how you let previous styles go by the wayside, and modernism is supposed to be functionalist and form follows function. Well, bunkers are the most modernist structures you can possibly imagine. There's no frivolity, or there's no vernacular even to them. They're just, you know, these things that have to do one thing and they have to do that well. And that's kind of one way of thinking about modernism in architecture. And then the sculpture series it's kind of part of the same. If I were to have a show at Anya's or in a gallery or something, I would want the different mediums to be shown together. I think they enhance each other. Mm-hmm. So I've been putting a lot of time into these guys as well, that's just birch wood and gouache paint, and then they're mounted on mirrors. I think that they're just basically traditional sectional models, which you learn how to make or I learned how to make in school. And you can see, I mean, you can read the bunkers in them as forms, but they're more archetypal. They're less tied to a sort of specific place and time. There's a level of abstraction there that I find interesting, you know, which is separate from the drawings. So same subject matter, but taking it in a different sort of formal way. Well, for these two, I made a plan in a section what I interpolated from schematics online, really loose schematics, and then I just sort of made some decisions and chopped them up. I draw that in AutoCAD, and then I transfer that to paper, and then I transfer the paper to the wood, and then I use a scroll saw to cut out the shapes, and then sand it, and then gesso the sides, paint the sides with gouache, use a drill mount to get the structure, the horizontal structures in there, and then fit it together like a puzzle piece, and then mount that on top of the mirror. They're mounted a little bit floating about an inch off of the glass, and so the mirror helps you to see the inside and the bottom of the piece. Psychologically, it's kind of interesting because I think if one is stuck in a bunker, you're certainly going to be, you're forced to be introverted in a sense. You're forced to kind of just be around yourself and look at yourself if you're in that environment. So a mirror seemed to be appropriate in that regard as well.
So you're working mostly drawing and some sculpture?
These days, yeah. Yeah, I haven't made a painting in quite a while, actually. Well over a year. I've been...
You're almost letting the sculpture do what the painting used to.
In a way, right?
Yeah.
There was kind of there's a monochromatic element to it that was the paintings weren't monochromatic, but they were usually very tonally close to. So there's some sort of relationship there. Yeah, it's almost as though you need to get your fix out. Like if you're used to working in an abstract manner, it feels good to have an outlet that's purely that and getting at that, because it was very different from the drawings. But actually, I think it's pretty healthy to work on both at the same time, kind of bouncing ideas and ways of working against each other. Keeps it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, I don't know, it's hard to tell how these things are really going to come out, even though they're so planned out and they're so designed, until you actually get it painted and perfected and spaced correctly and stabilized. You don't quite know exactly what it's going to look like. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of fun.
There's that 90%.
There's that 90%, 85, 90%. Keep that OCD at bay.